Disc 3.
Chapter 8. Enter Miss Marple. Craddock laid the typed transcript of the various interviews before the chief constable. The latter had just finished reading the wire received from the Swiss police. "So, he had a police record, all right," said Rydesdale. Very much as one thought." "Yes, sir." "Jewellery, yes. Falsified entries, yes. Check. Definitely a dishonest fellow." "Yes, sir. In a small way." "Quite so. And small things lead to large things. I wonder, sir." The chief constable looked up. "Worried, Craddock?" "Yes, sir." "Why? It's a straightforward story. Or isn't it? Let's see what all these people you've been talking to have to say." He drew the report towards him and read it through rapidly. "It's the usual thing. Plenty of inconsistencies and contradictions. Different people's accounts of a few moments of stress never agree, but the main picture seems clear enough." "I know, sir, but it's an unsatisfactory picture. If you know what I mean, it's the wrong picture." "Well, let's take the facts. Rudy Schertz took the 5:20 bus from Meddenham to Chipping Cleghorn, arriving there at 6 o'clock. Evidence of conductor and 2 passengers. From the bus stop, he walked away in the direction of Little Paddocks. He got into the house with no particular difficulty, probably through the front door. He held up the company with a revolver. He fired 2 shots, one of which slightly wounded Miss Blacklock. He then killed himself with a 3rd shot. Whether accidentally or deliberately, there is not sufficient evidence to show. The reasons why he did all this are profoundly unsatisfactory, I agree. But why isn't really a question we are called upon to answer. A coroner's jury may bring it in suicide or accidental death. Whichever verdict it is, it's the same as far as we're concerned. We can write finis." "You mean we can always fall back upon Colonel Easterbrook's psychology?" said Craddock gloomily. Rydesdale smiled. "Well, after all, the Colonel's probably had a good deal of experience," he said. "I'm pretty sick of the psychological jargon that's used so glibly about everything nowadays, but we can't really rule it out." "I still feel the picture's all wrong, sir." "Any reason to believe that somebody in the set-up at Chipping Cleghorn is lying to you?" Craddock hesitated. "I think the foreign girl knows more than she lets on, but that may be just prejudice on my part." "You think she might possibly have been in it with this fellow, let him into the house, put him up to it?" "Something of the kind. I wouldn't put it past her. But that surely indicates that there really was something valuable, money or jewellery, in the house, and that doesn't seem to have been the case. Miss Blacklock negatived it quite decidedly. So did the others. That leaves us with the proposition that there was something valuable in the house that nobody knew about. Quite a bestseller plot." "I agree it's ridiculous, sir. The only other point is Miss Bunner's certainty that it was a definite attempt by Schertz to murder Miss Blacklock." "Well, from what you say, and from her statement, this Miss Bunner—" "Oh, I agree, sir," Craddock put in quickly. "She's an utterly unreliable witness, highly suggestible. Anyone could put a thing into her head. But the interesting thing is that this is quite her own theory. No one has suggested it to her. Everybody else negatives it. For once, she's not swimming with the tide. It definitely is her own impression." "But why should Rudy Schertz want to kill Miss Blacklock?" "Well, there you are, sir. I don't know. Miss Blacklock doesn't know. unless she's a much better liar than I think she is. Nobody knows. So, presumably, it isn't true. He sighed. "Now, cheer up, Craddock," said the Chief Constable. "I'm taking you off to lunch with Sir Henry and myself. The best that the Royal Spa Hotel in Meddenham Wells can provide." "Thank you, sir." Craddock looked slightly surprised. "You see, we received a letter—" He broke off as Sir Henry Clithering entered the room. "Ah, there you are, Henry." Sir Henry, informal this time, said, "Morning, Dermot." "I've got something for you, Henry," said the Chief Constable. "What's that?" "Authentic letter from an old pussy, staying at the Royal Spa Hotel. Something she thinks we might like to know in connection with this Chipping Cleghorn business." "Ah, the old pussies," said Sir Henry triumphantly. "What did I tell you? They hear everything, they see everything, and unlike the famous adage, they speak all evil. What's this particular one got hold of?" Rydesdale consulted the letter. "Writes just like my old grandmother," he complained. "Spiky. Like a spider in the ink bottle, and all underlined. A good deal about how she hopes it won't be taking up our valuable time, but might possibly be of some slight assistance, etc., etc. What's her name? Jane something Marple? No, Marple. Jane Marple." "Ye gods and little fishes," said Sir Henry. "Can it be? George, it's my own particular one and only four-starred pussy. The super pussy of all old pussies, and she has managed somehow to be at Meddenham Wells instead of peacefully at home in St. Mary Mead, just at the right time to be mixed up in a murder. Once more a murder is announced for the benefit and enjoyment of Miss Marple." "Well, Henry," said Rydesdale sardonically, "I'll be glad to see your paragon. Come on. We'll lunch at the Royal Spa, and we'll interview the lady. Craddock here is looking highly sceptical." "Not at all, sir," said Craddock politely. He thought to himself that sometimes his godfather carried things a bit far. Miss Jane Marple was very nearly, if not quite, as Craddock had pictured her. She was far more benignant than he had imagined, and a good deal older. She seemed indeed very old. She had snow-white hair and a pink crinkled face and very soft, innocent blue eyes, and she was heavily enmeshed in fleecy wool round her shoulders in the form of a lacy cape, and wool that she was knitting, and which turned out to be a baby's shawl. She was all incoherent delight and pleasure at seeing Sir Henry, and became quite flustered when introduced to the Chief Constable and Detective Inspector Craddock. "Oh, but really, Sir Henry, how fortunate. How very fortunate. So long since I have seen you. Yes, my rheumatism is very bad of late. Of course, I couldn't have afforded this hotel. Really fantastic what they charge nowadays. But Raymond, my nephew, Raymond West, you may remember him. Everyone knows his name. Yes, the dear boy has been so successful with his clever books. He prides himself upon never writing about anything pleasant. The dear boy insisted on paying all my expenses. And his dear wife is making a name for herself, too, as an artist. Mostly jugs of dying flowers and broken combs on windowsills. I never dare tell her, but I still admire Blair Leighton and Alma Tadema. Oh, but I am chattering. And the Chief Constable himself. Indeed, I never expected it. I'm so afraid I shall be taking up his time." Completely gaga, thought the disgusted Detective Inspector Craddock. "Come into the manager's private room," said Rydesdale. "We can talk better there." When Miss Marple had been disentangled from her wool and her spare knitting pins collected, she accompanied them, fluttering and protesting, to Mr. Rowlandson's comfortable sitting-room. "Now, Miss Marple, let's hear what you have to tell us," said the Chief Constable. Miss Marple came to the point with unexpected brevity. "It was a cheque," she said. "He altered it." "He?" "The young man at the desk here, the one who is supposed to have staged that hold-up and shot himself." "He altered a cheque, you say?" Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, I have it here." She extracted it from her bag and laid it on the table. "It came this morning with my others from the bank. You can see it was for £7, and he altered it to 17. A stroke in front of the 7, and teen added after the word 7, with a nice artistic little block just blurring the whole word. It's really very nicely done. A certain amount of practice, I should say. It's the same ink, because I wrote the cheque actually at the desk. I should think he'd done it quite often before, wouldn't you?" "He picked the wrong person to do it to this time," remarked Sir Henry. Miss Marple nodded agreement. "Yes, I'm afraid he would never have gone very far in crime. I was quite the wrong person. Some busy young married woman or some girl having a love affair, that's the kind who write cheques for all sorts of different sums and don't really look through their passbooks carefully. But an old woman who has to be careful of the pennies and who has formed habits, that's quite the wrong person to choose. £17 is a sum I never write a cheque for. £20, a round sum for the monthly wages and books. And as for my personal expenditure, I usually cash 7. It used to be 5, but everything has gone up so." "And perhaps he reminded you of someone," prompted Sir Henry, mischief in his eye. Miss Marple smiled and shook her head at him. "You are very naughty, Sir Henry. As a matter of fact, he did. Fred Tyler at the fish shop always slipped an extra 1 in the shillings column. Eating so much fish as we do nowadays, it made a long bill, and lots of people never added it up. Just 10 shillings in his pocket every time. Not much, but enough to get himself a few neckties and take Jessie Spragg, the girl in the Drapers, to the pictures. Cut a splash. That's what these young fellows want to do. Well, the very first week I was here, there was a mistake in my bill. I pointed it out to the young man, and he apologized very nicely and looked very much upset, but I thought to myself then, you've got a shifty eye, young man. What I mean by a shifty eye, continued Miss Marple, is the kind that looks very straight at you and never looks away or blinks. Craddock gave a sudden movement of appreciation. He thought to himself, Jim Kelly to the life, remembering a notorious swindler he had helped to put behind bars not long ago. Rudy Schertz was a thoroughly unsatisfactory character, said Rydesdale. He's got a police record in Switzerland, we find. Made the place too hot for him, I suppose, and came over here with forged papers, said Miss Marple. Exactly, said Rydesdale. He was going about with the little red-haired waitress from the dining-room, said Miss Marple. Fortunately, I don't think her heart's affected at all. She just liked to have someone a bit different, and he used to give her flowers and chocolates, which the English boys don't do much. Has she told you all she knows? She asked, turning suddenly to Craddock. Or not quite all yet? I'm not absolutely sure, said Craddock cautiously. I think there's a little to come, said Miss Marple. She's looking very worried. Brought me kippers instead of herrings this morning, and forgot the milk jug. Usually she's an excellent waitress. Yes, she's worried. Afraid she might have to give evidence or something like that. But I expect... And her candid blue eyes swept over the manly proportions and handsome face of Detective Inspector Craddock with truly feminine Victorian appreciation, that you will be able to persuade her to tell you all she knows. Detective Inspector Craddock blushed, and Sir Henry chuckled. It might be important, said Miss Marple. He may have told her who it was. Rydesdale stared at her. Who what was? Oh, I express myself so badly. Who it was who put him up to it, I mean. So you think someone put him up to it? Miss Marple's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, but surely, I mean... Here's a personable young man who filches a little bit here and a little bit there, alters a small cheque, perhaps helps himself to a small piece of jewellery if it's left lying around, or takes a little money from the till, all sorts of small, petty thefts. Keeps himself going in ready money so that he can dress well and take a girl about, all that sort of thing. And then suddenly he goes off with a revolver and holds up a room full of people and shoots at someone. He'd never have done a thing like that. Not for a moment. He wasn't that kind of person. It doesn't make sense. Craddock drew in his breath sharply. That was what Letitia Blacklock had said, what the vicar's wife had said, what he himself felt with increasing force. It didn't make sense. And now Sir Henry's old pussy was saying it too, with complete certainty in her fluting old lady's voice. "Perhaps you will tell us, Miss Marple," he said, and his voice was suddenly aggressive. "What did happen then?" She turned on him in surprise. "But how should I know what happened? There was an account in the paper, but it says so little. One can make conjectures, of course, but one has no accurate information." "George," said Sir Henry, "would it be very unorthodox if Miss Marple were allowed to read the notes of the interviews Craddock had with these people at Chipping Cleghorn?" "It may be unorthodox," said Rydesdale, "but I've not got where I am by being orthodox. She could read them. I'd be curious to hear what she has to say." Miss Marple was all embarrassment. "Oh, I'm afraid you've been listening to Sir Henry. Sir Henry is always too kind. He thinks too much of any little observations I may have made in the past. Really, I have no gifts at all, except perhaps a certain knowledge of human nature. People, I find, are apt to be far too trustful. I'm afraid that I have a tendency always to believe the worst. Not a nice trait, but so often justified by subsequent events." "Read these," said Rydesdale, thrusting the typewritten sheets upon her. "They won't take you long. After all, these people are your kind. You must know a lot of people like them. You may be able to spot something that we haven't. The case is just going to be closed. Let's have an amateur's opinion on it before we shut up the files. I don't mind telling you that Craddock here isn't satisfied. He says, like you, that it doesn't make sense." There was a silence whilst Miss Marple read. She put the typewritten sheets down at last. "It's very interesting," she said with a sigh. "All the different things that people say and think. The things they see or think that they see. And all so complex. Nearly all so trivial. And if one thing isn't trivial, it's so hard to spot which one. Like a needle in a haystack." Craddock felt a twinge of disappointment. Just for a moment or two he had wondered if Sir Henry might be right about this funny old lady. She might have put her finger on something. Old people were often very sharp. He'd never, for instance, been able to conceal anything from his own great-aunt Emma. She had finally told him that his nose twitched when he was about to tell a lie. But just a few fluffy generalities, that was all that Sir Henry's famous Miss Marple could produce. He felt annoyed with her, and said rather curtly, "The truth of the matter is that the facts are indisputable. Whatever conflicting details these people give, they all saw one thing. They saw a masked man with a revolver and a torch open the door and hold them up. And whether they think he said, 'Stick 'em up,' or 'your money or your life,' or whatever phrase is associated with a hold-up in their minds, they saw him." "But surely," said Miss Marple gently, "they couldn't actually have seen anything at all. Craddock caught his breath. She'd got it. She was sharp, after all. He was testing her by that speech of his, but she hadn't fallen for it. It didn't actually make any difference to the facts or to what happened, but she'd realized, as he'd realized, that those people who had seen a masked man holding them up couldn't really have seen him at all. If I understand rightly, Miss Marple had a pink flush on her cheeks. Her eyes were bright and pleased as a child's. There wasn't any light in the hall outside, and not on the landing upstairs either. That's right, said Craddock. And so, if a man stood in the doorway and flashed a powerful torch into the room, nobody could see anything but the torch, could they? No, they couldn't. I tried it out. And so when some of them say they saw a masked man, etc., they are really, though they don't realize it, recapitulating from what they saw afterwards, when the lights came on. So it really all fits in very well, doesn't it? On the assumption that Rudy Shirts was the, I think, fall guy, is the expression I mean. Rydesdale stared at her in such surprise that she grew pinker still. I may have got the term wrong, she murmured. I am not very clever about Americanisms, and I understand they change very quickly. I got it from one of Mr. Dashiell Hammett's stories. I understand from my nephew Raymond that he is considered at the top of the tree in what is called the tough style of literature. A fall guy, if I understand it rightly, means someone who will be blamed for a crime really committed by someone else. This Rudy Shirts seems to me exactly the right type for that. Rather stupid, really, you know, but full of cupidity and probably extremely credulous. Rydesdale said, smiling tolerantly, "Are you suggesting that he was persuaded by someone to go out and take pot shots at a room full of people? It's rather a tall order." "I think he was told that it was a joke," said Miss Marple. "He was paid for doing it, of course. Paid, that is, to put an advertisement in the newspaper, to go out and spy out the household premises, and then, on the night in question, he was to go there, assume a mask and a black cloak, and throw open a door, brandishing a torch, and cry, 'Hands up!' And fire off a revolver?" "No, no," said Miss Marple. "He never had a revolver." "But everyone says—" began Rydesdale and stopped. "Exactly," said Miss Marple. "Nobody could possibly have seen a revolver, even if he had one. And I don't think he had. I think that after he'd called 'Hands up,' somebody came up quietly behind him in the darkness and fired those 2 shots over his shoulder. It frightened him to death. He swung round, and as he did so, that other person shot him and then let the revolver drop beside him." The 3 men looked at her. Sir Henry said softly, "It's a possible theory." "But who is Mr. X who came up in the darkness?" asked the Chief Constable. Miss Marple coughed. "You'll have to find out from Miss Blacklock who wanted to kill her." Good for old Dora Bunner, thought Craddock. Instinct against intelligence every time. "So you think it was a deliberate attempt on Miss Blacklock's life?" asked Drysdale. "It certainly has that appearance," said Miss Marple, "though there are 1 or 2 difficulties. But what I was really wondering about was whether there mightn't be a short cut. I've no doubt that whoever arranged this with Rudy Shirts took pains to tell him to keep his mouth shut about it. And perhaps he did keep his mouth shut, but if he talked to anybody, it would probably be to that girl Myrna Harris. And he just may, have dropped some hint as to the kind of person who'd suggested the whole thing. "I'll see her now," said Craddock, rising. Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, do, Inspector Craddock. I'll feel happier when you have, because once she's told you anything she knows, she'll be much safer." "Safer?" "Yes, I see." He left the room. The Chief Constable said doubtfully but tactfully, "Well, Miss Marple, you've certainly given us something to think about." "I'm sorry about it, I am really," said Myrna Harris. "It's ever so nice of you not to be ratty about it. But you see, Mum's the sort of person who fusses like anything, and it did look as though I'd, been an accessory before the fact." The words ran glibly off her tongue. "I mean, I was afraid you'd never take my word for it, that I only thought it was just a bit of fun." Inspector Craddock repeated the reassuring phrases with which he had broken down Myrna's resistance. "Oh, I will. I'll tell you all about it. But you will keep me out of it, if you can, because of Mum. It all started with Rudy breaking a date with me. We were going to the pictures that evening, and then he said he wouldn't be able to come, and I was a bit standoffish with him about it, because after all it had been his idea, and I don't fancy being stood up by a foreigner. And he said it wasn't his fault, and I said that it was a likely story, and then he said he'd got a bit of a lark on that night, and that he wasn't going to be out of pocket by it, and I fancy a wristwatch. So I said, 'What do you mean by a lark?' And he said not to tell anyone, but there was to be a party somewhere, and he was to stage a sham hold-up. Then he showed me the advertisement he'd put in, and I had to laugh. He was a bit scornful about it all, said it was kid stuff, really, but that was just like the English. They never really grew up, and of course I said, what did he mean talking like that about us? And we had a bit of an argument, but we made it up. Only you can understand, can't you, sir, that when I read all about it, and it hadn't been a joke at all, and Rudy had shot someone, and then shot himself, why, I didn't know what to do. I thought if I said I knew about it beforehand, it would look as though I were in on the whole thing. But it really did seem like a joke when he told me about it. I'd have sworn he meant it that way. I didn't even know he'd got a revolver. He never said anything about taking a revolver with him." Craddock comforted her, and then asked the most important question. "Who did he say it was who had arranged this party?" But there he drew a blank. "He never said who it was that was getting him to do it. I suppose nobody was, really. It was all his own doing." "He didn't mention a name. Did he say he or she?" "He didn't say anything except that it was going to be a scream. 'I shall laugh to see all their faces.' That's what he said." He hadn't had long to laugh, Craddock thought. "It's only a theory," said Rydesdale as they drove back to Meddenham. "Nothing to support it, nothing at all. Put it down as old maids' vapourings and let it go?" "I'd rather not do that, sir." "That's all very improbable. A mysterious X appearing suddenly in the darkness behind our Swiss friend. Where did he come from? Who was he? Where had he been?" "He could have come in through the side door," said Craddock, "just as Shirts came." "Or," he added slowly, "he could have come from the kitchen." "She could have come from the kitchen, you mean?" "Yes, sir. It's a possibility. Now, I've not been satisfied about that girl all along. She strikes me as a nasty bit of goods. All that screaming and hysterics. It could have been put on. She could have worked on this young fellow, let him in at the right moment, rigged the whole thing, shot him, bolted back into the dining room, caught up her bit of silver and her chamois, and started her screaming act. Against that we have the fact that, what's his name? Oh, yes, Edmund Swettenham definitely says the key was turned on the outside of the door and that he turned it to release her. Any other door into that part of the house? Yes, there's a door to the back stairs and kitchen just under the stairs, but it seems the handle came off 3 weeks ago and nobody's come to put it on yet. In the meantime, you can't open the door. I'm bound to say that story seems correct. The spindle and the 2 handles were on a shelf outside the door in the hall, and they were thickly coated with dust. But, of course, a professional would have ways of opening that door all right. Better look up the girl's record, see if her papers are in order. But it seems to me the whole thing is very theoretical. Again the chief constable looked inquiringly at his subordinate. Craddock replied quietly, "I know, sir, and of course if you think the case ought to be closed, it must be. But I'd appreciate it if I could work on it for just a little longer." Rather to his surprise, the chief constable said quietly and approvingly, "Good lad. Well, there's the revolver to work on. If this theory is correct, it wasn't Schertz's revolver, and certainly nobody so far has been able to say that Schertz ever had a revolver. It's a German make. I know, sir, but this country's absolutely full of continental makes of guns. All the Americans brought them back, and so did our chaps. You can't go by that." "True enough. Any other lines of inquiry?" "There's got to be a motive. If there's anything in this theory at all, it means that last Friday's business wasn't a mere joke and wasn't an ordinary hold-up. It was a cold-blooded attempt at murder. Somebody tried to murder Miss Blacklock. Now, why? It seems to me that if anyone knows the answer to that, it must be Miss Blacklock herself." "I understand she rather poured cold water on that idea." "She poured cold water on the idea that Rudy Schertz wanted to murder her, and she was quite right. And there's another thing, sir." "Yes?" "Somebody might try again." "That would certainly prove the truth of the theory," said the chief constable dryly. "By the way, look after Miss Marple, won't you?" "Miss Marple? Why?" "I gather she's taking up residence at the vicarage in Chipping Cleghorn and coming into Meddenham Wells twice a week for her treatments. It seems that Mrs. What's-her-name is the daughter of an old friend of Miss Marple's." "Good sporting instincts, that old bean. Oh, well, I suppose she hasn't much excitement in her life, and sniffing round after possible murderers gives her a kick." "I wish she wasn't coming," said Craddock seriously. "Going to get under your feet?" "Not that, sir. But she's a nice old thing. I shouldn't like anything to happen to her. Always supposing, I mean, that there's anything in this theory." Chapter 9. Concerning a door. "I'm sorry to bother you again, Miss Blacklock." "Oh, it doesn't matter. I suppose as the inquest was adjourned for a week, you were hoping to get more evidence." Detective Inspector Craddock nodded. "To begin with, Miss Blacklock, Rudy Schertz was not the son of the proprietor of the Hotel des Alpes at Montreux. He seems to have started his career as an orderly in a hospital at Bern. A good many of the patients missed small pieces of jewellery. Under another name, he was a waiter at one of the small winter sports places. His speciality there was making out duplicate bills in the restaurant with items on one that didn't appear on the other. The difference, of course, went into his pocket. After that, he was in a department store in Zurich. Their losses from shoplifting were rather above the average whilst he was with them. It seems likely that the shoplifting wasn't entirely due to customers. He was a picker-up of unconsidered trifles, in fact," said Miss Blacklock dryly. "Then I was right in thinking that I had not seen him before." "You were quite right. No doubt you were pointed out to him at the Royal Spa Hotel, and he pretended to recognise you. The Swiss police had begun to make his own country rather too hot for him, and he came over here with a very nice set of forged papers and took a job at the Royal Spa. "Quite a good hunting ground," said Miss Blacklock dryly. "It's extremely expensive, and very well-off people stay there. Some of them are careless about their bills, I expect." "Yes," said Craddock. There were prospects of a satisfactory harvest. Miss Blacklock was frowning. "I see all that," she said. "But why come to Chipping Cleghorn? What does he think we've got here that could possibly be better than the rich Royal Spa Hotel?" "You stick to your statement that there's nothing of a special value in the house?" "Of course there isn't. I should know. I can assure you, Inspector, we've not got an unrecognised Rembrandt or anything like that." "Then it looks, doesn't it, as though your friend, Miss Bunner, were right. He came here to attack you." "There, Letty, what did I tell you?" "Oh, nonsense, Bunny." "But is it nonsense?" said Craddock. "I think, you know, that it's true." Miss Blacklock stared very hard at him. "Now let's get this straight. You really believe that this young man came out here, having previously arranged, by means of an advertisement, that half the village would turn up agog at that particular time—" "But he mayn't have meant that to happen," interrupted Miss Bunner eagerly. "It may have been just a horrid sort of warning. To you, Letty. That's how I read it at the time. A murder is announced. I felt in my bones that it was sinister. If it had all gone as planned, he would have shot you and got away. And how would anyone have ever known who it was?" "Well, that's true enough," said Miss Blacklock, "but I knew that advertisement wasn't a joke, Letty. I said so. And look at Mitzi. She was frightened too." "Ah," said Craddock. "Mitzi. I'd like to know rather more about that young woman. Her permit and papers are quite in order." "I don't doubt that," said Craddock dryly. "Schertz's papers appear to be quite correct too." "But why should this Rudy Schertz want to murder me? That's what you don't attempt to explain, Inspector Craddock." "There may have been someone behind Schertz," said Craddock slowly. "Have you thought of that?" He used the words metaphorically, though it flashed across his mind that if Miss Marple's theory was correct, the words would also be true in a literal sense. In any case, they made little impression on Miss Blacklock, who still looked sceptical. "The point remains the same," she said. "Why on earth should anyone want to murder me?" "It's the answer to that I want you to give me, Miss Blacklock." "Well, I can't. That's flat. I've no enemies. As far as I'm aware, I've always lived on perfectly good terms with my neighbours. I don't know any guilty secrets about anyone. The whole idea's ridiculous. And if what you're hinting is that Mitzi has something to do with this, that's absurd too. As Miss Bunner has just told you, she was frightened to death when she saw that advertisement in the Gazette. She actually wanted to pack up and leave the house, then and there." "That may have been a clever move on her part. She may have known you'd press her to stay." "Well, of course, if you've made your mind up about it, you'll find an answer to everything. But I can assure you that if Mitzi had taken an unreasoning dislike to me, she might conceivably poison my food, but I'm sure she wouldn't go in for all this elaborate rigmarole. The whole idea's absurd. I believe you police have got an anti-foreigner complex. Mitzi may be a liar, but she's not a cold-blooded murderer. Go and bully her if you must. But when she's departed in a whirl of indignation or shut herself up howling in her room, I've a good mind to make you cook the dinner. Mrs. Harmon is bringing some old lady who is staying with her to tea this afternoon, and I wanted Mitzi to make some little cakes, but I suppose you'll upset her completely. Can't you possibly go and suspect somebody else?" Craddock went out to the kitchen. He asked Mitzi the questions that he had asked her before, and received the same answers. Yes, she had locked the front door soon after 4 o'clock. No, she did not always do so, but that afternoon she had been nervous because of that dreadful advertisement. It was no good locking the side door, because Miss Blacklock and Miss Bunner went out that way to shut up the ducks and feed the chickens, and Mrs. Hames usually came in that way from work. Mrs. Hames says she locked the door when she came in at 5:30.
Ah, and you believe her? Oh, yes, you believe her.
Do you think we shouldn't believe her?
What does it matter what I think? You will not believe me?
Supposing you give us a chance. You think Mrs. Hames didn't lock that door?
I thinking she was very careful not to lock it.
What do you mean by that? Asked Craddock.
That young man, he does not work alone. No, he knows where to come. He knows that when he comes, a door will be left open for him. Oh, very conveniently open.
What are you trying to say?
What is the use of what I say? You will not listen? You say I'm a poor refugee girl who tells lies. You say that a fair-haired English lady, oh no, she does not tell lies. She is so British, so honest. So you believe her and not me. But I could tell you, oh yes, I could tell you. She banged down a saucepan on the stove.
Craddock was in two minds whether to take notice of what might only be a stream of spite. "We note everything we are told," he said.
"I shall not tell you anything at all. Why should I? You are all alike. You persecute and despise poor refugees. If I say to you that when, a week before, that young man come to ask Miss Blacklock for money, and she sends him away, as you say, with a flea in his ear, if I tell you that after that I hear him talking with Mrs. Hames, yes, out there in the summer house, all you say is that I make it up."
And so you probably are making it up, thought Craddock. But he said aloud, "You couldn't hear what was said out in the summer house."
"There you are wrong," screamed Mitzi triumphantly. "I go out to get nettles. It makes very nice vegetables, nettles. They do not think so, but I cook it and not tell them. And I hear them talking in there. He say to her, 'But where can I hide?' And she say, 'I will show you.' And then she say, 'At 6:15. And I think, ah, so, that is how you behave, my fine lady. After you come back from work, you go out to meet a man. You bring him into the house. Miss Blacklock, I think, she will not like that. She will turn you out. I will watch, I think, and listen, and then I will tell Miss Blacklock. But I understand now I was wrong. It was not love she plans with him. It was to rob and to murder. But you will say I make all this up. Wicked Mitzi, you say. I will take her to prison."
Craddock wondered. She might be making it up, but possibly she might not. He asked cautiously, "You are sure it was this Rudy Shirt she was talking to?"
"Of course I am sure. He just leave, and I see him go from the drive across to the summer house. And presently," said Mitzi defiantly, "I go out to see if there are any nice young green nettles."
Would there, the inspector wondered, be any nice young green nettles in October? But he appreciated that Mitzi had had to produce a hurried reason for what had undoubtedly been nothing more than plain snooping. "You didn't hear any more than what you have told me?" Mitzi looked aggrieved.
"That Miss Bunner, the one with the long nose, she call and call me. Mitzi, Mitzi. So I have to go. Oh, she is irritating, always interfering. Says she will teach me to cook. Her cooking. It tastes, yes, everything she does. Of water. Water, water."
"Why didn't you tell me this the other day?" asked Craddock sternly.
"Because I did not remember. I did not think. Only afterwards do I say to myself, it was planned then. Planned with her."
"You are quite sure it was Mrs. Hames?"
"Oh, yes, I am sure. Oh, yes, I am very sure. She is a thief, that Mrs. Hames. A thief and an associate of thieves. What she gets for working in the garden, it is not enough for such a fine lady, no. She has to rob Miss Blacklock, who has been kind to her. Oh, she is bad, 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 that one.
Supposing, said the inspector, watching her closely, that someone was to say that you had been seen talking to Rudy Schertz. The suggestion had less effect than he had hoped for. Mitzi merely snorted and tossed her head.
If anyone say they see me talking to him, that is lies, 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 she said contemptuously. To tell lies about anyone, that is easy. But in England, you have to prove them true. Miss Blacklock tell me that, and it is true, is it not? I do not speak with murderers and thieves, and no English policeman shall say I do. And how can I do cooking for lunch when you are here? Talk, talk, talk. Go out of my kitchens, please. I want now to make a very careful sauce.
Craddock went obediently. He was a little shaken in his suspicions of Mitzi. Her story about Philippa Hames had been told with great conviction. Mitzi might be a liar, he thought she was, but he fancied that there might be some substratum of truth in this particular tale. He resolved to speak to Philippa on the subject. She had seemed to him when he questioned her a quiet, well-bred young woman. He had had no suspicion of her. Crossing the hall, in his abstraction, he tried to open the wrong door. Miss Bunner, descending the staircase, hastily put him right.
No, not that door, she said. It doesn't open. The next one to the left. It's very confusing, isn't it? So many doors.
There are a good many, said Craddock, looking up and down the narrow hall. Miss Bunner amiably enumerated them for him.
First the door to the cloakroom, and then the cloaks cupboard door, and then the dining room. That's on that side. And on this side, the dummy door that you were trying to get through, and then there's the drawing-room door proper, and then the china cupboard door, and the door of the little flower room, and at the end, the side door. It's most confusing, especially these two being so near together. I've often tried the wrong one by mistake. We used to have the hall table against it, as a matter of fact, but then we moved it along against the wall there.
Craddock had noted, almost mechanically, a thin line horizontally across the panels of the door he had been trying to open. He realized now it was the mark where the table had been. Something stirred vaguely in his mind as he asked, "Moved? How long ago?" In questioning Dora Bunner, there was fortunately no need to give a reason for any question. Any query on any subject seemed perfectly natural to the garrulous Miss Bunner, who delighted in the giving of information, however trivial. Now, let me see. Really quite recently. 10 days or a fortnight ago. Why was it moved? Well, I really can't remember. Something to do with the flowers. I think Philippa did a big vase. She arranges flowers quite beautifully. All autumn colouring and twigs and branches, and it was so big it caught your hair as you went past. So Philippa said, why not move the table along? And anyway, the flowers would look much better against the bare wall than against the panels of the door. Only we had to take down Wellington at Waterloo. Not a print I'm really very fond of. We put it under the stairs. It's not really a dummy, then? Craddock asked, looking at the door. Oh, no. It's a real door, if that's what you mean. It's the door of the small drawing-room, but when the rooms were thrown into one didn't need two doors, so this one was fastened up. Fastened up? Craddock tried it again, gently. You mean it's nailed up, or just locked? Oh, locked, I think, and bolted, too. He saw the bolt at the top and tried it. The bolt slid back easily, too easily. When was it last open? He asked Miss Bunner. Oh, years and years ago, I imagine. It's never been opened since I've been here, I know that. You don't know where the key is? Oh, there are a lot of keys in the hall drawer. It's probably among those. Craddock followed her and looked at a rusty assortment of old keys pushed far back in the drawer. He scanned them and selected one that looked different from the rest and went back to the door. The key fitted and turned easily. He pushed, and the door slid open noiselessly. "Oh, do be careful," cried Miss Bunner. "There may be something resting against it inside. We never open it." "Don't you?" said the inspector. His face now was grim. He said with emphasis, "This door's been opened quite recently, Miss Bunner. The lock's been oiled, and the hinges." She stared at him, her foolish face agape. "But who could have done that?" she asked. "That's what I mean to find out," said Craddock grimly. He thought. X from outside? No. X was here, in this house. X was in the drawing-room that night.